Welcome to the very first official episode of Scratchpad the podcast. This is a series where we will be discussing life. Everything from the ups and the downs to the in-depth to the on the surface level stuff. Today I would like to talk about authenticity because this is something that has been on my mind for a very long time. I feel sometimes it looks like the whole world is just walking around like chickens with their head cut off because they just don't really know who they are, what they want to do, and where they want to go. And so we are all just trying to play the game of life and trying to find happiness and trying to make the next thing successful and trying to make everything work. But at the same time, it's also important to kind of stop and pause and look at yourself and be like, who am I? And how can I show up more authentically? And what even does that mean? It seems that a lot of people work on programs, which kind of makes sense. You're most of the day kind of on autopilot, but also the way that you react to things. It's the way that you were taught to react to things. But is that really the way that you want to react to things? Is that the way that you should react to things? Those are all questions that are so incredibly important to kind of reflect on, because if you kind of live on autopilot your entire life, then how would you ever really know who you are, and how would you ever be able to show up authentically? And when you do, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I feel like I've kind of gotten to the answer, at least in my own mind. I'm very curious to see what you guys think of it. So please do add to the discussion in the comments below if you have any thoughts. Today, I will be using my iPad as my scratch pad with all the notes on it, because at the core, I am very much an iPad kid. For a long time, I was definitely struggling with authenticity because I was breaking down patterns within my own system, like people pleasing, perfectionism, and all that. And I started thinking, it's like, okay, if I'm a people pleaser, then aren't I being the most authentic when I people please? Is that something that I can identify with? Is that something I want to be? And if I don't want to be that, am I being inauthentic? Like, am I being not true to myself? These are definitely questions that kept me occupied for a very long time, especially since there's so much talk within society with just like, be your most authentic self. But I was just having so much trouble knowing who I even was, and like, I felt like I wasn't doing it right or correctly. And at the same time, I knew that I had to try and learn to let that go because of the little perfectionist voice in my head. But on the other hand, there was also just something in me that felt unfinished. So I knew that this was a question that I needed to figure out for myself. So the best thing in my head to attack kind of a problem is to go to the source. So if we are all raised with patterns and belief systems, then we need to look at the people who are raising us, which means obviously the parents, then there's also the school system, and then there's also other children who are in turn raised by parents and the school system, etc., etc. So it's pretty complicated how all of this works. I also feel like people aren't just inherently born as blank slates. I personally believe that everyone has their own personality, and the circumstantial proof of that is that people will have multiple children and they are raising them the exact same way, but they still come out differently. They have different preferences, different likes, different dislikes, different tastes. So with that information, you might kind of come to the conclusion that there is an authentic you, and then there is a way that you are raised and things that you believe growing up that maybe don't really align with the authentic version of yourself. So I'm kind of looking at this as like a veil over the purest form of yourself. But where does that veil come from, and why was it created in the first place? How do you truly even figure out what is you and what is taught to you by other people? When I started to look at it that way, I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm starting to understand this situation right here, but at the same time, I needed something more to hold on to in order to be able to distinguish between what is me and what is someone else. So as I started to become more aware of this whole situation and kind of the system and how it worked, I realized a lot of my life was living on autopilot. My reactions to the world, to other people, to society, and just my daily, like the ways that I would move through life was very much based on, I think, a mix of intuition and autopilot. And it's totally understandable that we do live on autopilot, or else if you're constantly aware and constantly like having to focus on every single little thing in your life, you couldn't survive. I mean, it's like the breathing is on autopilot, you know what I mean? But I want my autopilot to be representative of who I am at the core, and not something that represents learned behaviors from other people. Well, there is a question that you can ask yourself, and when I heard this one, I felt like it really resonated, and it kind of started to break open this whole system and make me realize like, okay, that is the question I needed, which is, and you might have even heard of it before, who are you when no one is watching? And when I really sit with that and start to think about it and just like think away every single person that's in my life that might have an opinion that I might care about, what would I do? Who would I be? Authentically me. Like, would I just go and start slicing everyone's fingers off? Or would I want to be friends with everyone? Like, really, truly the me that's inside of me. And then as I sit with that more, I can answer the question and then even ask the why behind that. Like, okay, but why? But why? But why? Until I come to the core of just like, well, just because I want to. There is no other thing that I could think of that would be an alternative to this that I want to be. The only way to really get to the core of this question, if you are really, really, really honest with yourself, of course. And I feel like another question to add to this core question is, are you doing it because you fear something? So are you doing it because you fear an opinion of someone? Are you doing or saying or thinking something because you fear the consequences of it? And once you can honestly answer that question with no, that's where I feel you are being the most authentic version of yourself, at least in your head. So in summary, you could kind of describe the authentic you is the one that you want to be when you fear absolutely nothing. Although understandable, because we all have the need for acceptance and community, there's also just a confidence that you can have that if everyone lived in their own authentic self, they would understand who you are in your different and unique state. And so the closer that you can live to that version of yourself, the more magnetizing I feel you will be to the right people. That's the moment where I felt like it really, really clicked for me. But then it became a huge problem because, okay, now I know who I want to be, who I am without fear, but I can't just like get rid of the fear. You know, that's a feeling and that's like sitting very deep within my system. And that is something that you can definitely just accept the process of getting rid of and slowly but surely make these little steps towards who you want to be. Then you get to the point where, okay, maybe you got over your fear of getting in the water and now you're in big open waters treading and not knowing what direction to go. There is so much freedom. When you take fear away, you do not have a line anymore that you could just follow. You actually have to make decisions for yourself and just feel the calling from within yourself of like, I think I want to explore the southern region, and then just start swimming. Now what? There's nothing that you can see in this open ocean of things that you could possibly do. And then you can kind of start swimming and swimming and swimming, and in the process of swimming towards wherever you feel like going, are you even really doing the right thing? But is it about doing the right thing? Is that kind of like a system of thinking that we have been taught that shouldn't be there at all? Maybe the right thing to do is to just go. I want to be able to say that it took me months or even years to say, oh, I'm really getting to the point where I just totally feel like I am being myself. But if I am completely honest, it is still an ongoing process. It is still me unlearning a lot of things. It is still me reflecting on myself. But it's also such an interesting journey because it's so much fun to kind of like hit a wall and realize that you can just make the wall disappear. But then you also have to decide what's behind that wall. And that makes it scary in and of itself. And just because that's scary, that's technically a fear, you create another wall. And then you have to break that one down. And you just keep going and keep going until, I don't know, you just kind of trust that where you're going is the way for you to go. Or else you wouldn't have that intuition, or else you wouldn't have that voice in your head that says, you know, go that direction. The point is, I think, in your most authentic state is to embrace the freedom and to go with the flow. That saying is there for a reason, to go with the pull, the voice, the inspiration, and just follow it and start to become curious again. It's kind of like that childlike curiosity that we lost along the way. And it's a little bit like me making this video, I have this pull, this curiosity of doing it, but there are still so many fears surrounding it of like, oh, what will people think? And what if it's not successful? What if it is successful? Like so many things that I could think about. But if I was a kid, I wouldn't even have the capacity to think of the consequences, but I would have the pull to do it. And then I do it and I play and I have fun. And isn't that just a good thing in and of itself. When we were kids, at least for me, I was never really concerned about if I am going to the correct destination. It was always about following this spark of curiosity, about checking what's underneath this rock or what would be behind that corner. And is there ever anyone that walks up to me and say, you are not living correctly? No, because kids are allowed to do that. They're allowed to be curious and like discover the world. But where did we stop discovering the world? Where did we stop discovering our lives? Isn't our lives and the whole process just one big journey of discovery? But instead, we're just kind of living in this factory life of doing the same thing every day, all day, every day. I really wonder why we lost that curiosity and why we lost that urge to discover. Actually, I don't know if we lost it. I think we may have just been taught to not do it anymore. I mean, if you think about school and like 9-to-5 jobs, we're all kind of trained to just do the same thing over and over again without questioning anything. But that's the whole fun of curiosity and discovering, is you don't have an end destination in mind. So instead of worrying about if it's the right thing, let's worry about if you're enjoying the thing. And you won't know whether you will unless you just explore and play. And sometimes you will enjoy it and sometimes you won't enjoy it, but there's also enjoyment in learning that you don't enjoy it, if that kind of makes sense. I've read a lot of self-help articles and magazines and psychology stuff, and they're like, let's go back to your inner child. And I would always question, is like, what does that even mean? How do you get to your inner child? I can't just like look at a wall and just be like, I am deciding to be curious about that today. I feel like a lot of it is also just kind of getting rid of that laziness, which I don't believe it's necessarily laziness as much as it is just fear of being weird or looking weird. And instead, we just explore every little curiosity we have, even if it's just for the experience. So let's say at the simplest, you grab your makeup bag and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, all right, if I don't fear looking weird, what would I do? If I don't fear someone's opinion of me, what would I do? And it creates so much freedom that it's almost just kind of like scary and frightening, but you might lock onto something. For example, maybe you want to feel what it feels like to have the creaminess of the lipstick on your eyelids. And you know what? Maybe it looks good. Maybe it doesn't, but at least you know how that felt, and that might be kind of freeing and fun. Or maybe you want to see what your lips look like when you put blue eyeshadow on it. That might be fun. Maybe not. Or when it comes to cooking, for example, let's not worry about whether you're making a meal that tastes good. How about you just want to explore what it tastes like if you combine cumin and mint on a cucumber? I don't know. I'm just making stuff up right here. Maybe those are 3 things that you really like and you want to see how that feels when you put them all 3 together, right? I feel like so much of this curiosity and discovery and exploring is lost because we are worried about looking weird. And we also are worried about the daily life, like, can you pay the bills this month? Can you find a new apartment because you're getting kicked out? All that kind of stuff. It will get to a point where you are gonna go to your job and then all of a sudden just it clicks in your head and you'll realize this is not at all what I want to do, what I like doing. I'm only doing it because I fear that maybe someone doesn't want me as a partner because I don't have a steady income or whatever. But what happens when you go with the thing that you very much want to do, that you have an inkling for, and maybe you trust that little spark of creativity that the universe will take care of you and send you the correct people that will give you a whole new experience of life and different perspectives. Or maybe you find that all these little curiosities make you realize how happy you are at your job or at the school or the education that you're following. Maybe you're like, wow, I am so on the right path. That feels so good. But you could take all these little curiosities and bring everything a little bit further and ask just a little more questions. I think just the awareness of authenticity and of the fears that you have in your general daily life and pattern of thinking is already such a huge step. And you might even argue that authenticity is literally just the process of self-discovery. So even for me, when I was doing this people-pleasing perfectionism situation and I was living more blindly, just the point where I start to question, the point where I start to self-reflect, the point where I start to become more aware is already me being the most authentic version of myself, because I am just discovering myself. I'm learning my own patterns and belief systems. I'm learning what I like, what I don't like, who I want to be, and what my intention is in life towards other people and towards what I want to do with my time. So now I have a question to you. What is something you have always wanted to do, but you never let yourself do it. Let's give it 1 minute just thinking about it. Then my next question is, and why? Why did you not let yourself do it? Don't feel the pressure and don't feel a judgment. It is literally just a process of self-discovery. You don't have to leave it in the comments, but if you want to, I am definitely very curious. Please leave it down below. And let's work on becoming more authentic versions of ourselves. Let's work on showing up more true and honest to ourselves towards the outside world, so the outside world can get to know us better, and at the same time we can get to know the outside world better, because everything you give out, you get back. That's what I believe, at least. Thank you so much for listening. I had a blast. I'll see you in the next episode.